What comes to mind for you when you hear the word money? There's so many different reactions and feelings and associations we all have depending on our upbringing and past experiences. And being Mental Health Awareness Month, we felt like it was really important to talk about this topic because it is one of the leading factors of mental health decline in the US. And it's increasingly being talked about in our culture, in our society. If it's not being talked about, it's being thought about. And so we wanted to make sure we address and kind of start exploring, what does God say about money? How do we actually view money and navigate all of these nuances with money in a biblical and God honoring way?
Hello, we are back
Yes.
today with a very not talked about topic in the Christian circles, the church world, and it's so prevalent everywhere.
Mhm.
And you will definitely relate to this.
Or maybe it is talked about, but mostly in a certain way or angle. And today we are literally going to unpack it and the many layers that are in it. Can you guess what it is?
It's the topic of money.
I guess people
So
would have known that if they had clicked this episode based on the title. But yes, it
that
is.
that is true. That is true. So we want to unpack money. So I feel like this should be like a few episodes in a series,
At
but
least, yeah.
today we're just going to unpack the foundational ways. And for this episode, we're going to share our own personal struggles with our own upbringing with money, and also how do we wrestle with money as Christians. And we'll go
Mhm.
through some nuances as well that's not really talked about in common circles.
Mhm.
So money is such a big focus in this world. Often we equate it to power, to control, to our desires. There's just so many things that you can do with money. And also, we
Mhm.
need money to live as well. But
Mhm.
Christians, I found that we just find that our friends also struggle with this, especially
Everybody does, yeah.
yeah, everyone struggles with this, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area. So,
Mhm.
I want to start off with just sharing more about our own personal journeys. And Grace and I have very different journeys with money, and just our relationship with it. So
Can I start off by saying every person, whether or not you realize it, whether or not you're like conscious of it, all of us have a relationship with money. And I think that's just important to say out front because I think it's a very sensitive topic. People get
yeah,
very like dodgy about it, like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or oh, I don't struggle with that at all. So I think a lot of people have this perception that money is this big thing that a lot of people struggle with, but maybe they don't because we all have unique relationships with it that makes us feel like our relationship is the right way. So, just want to put that out there off the bat to say that we all have normalized interactions and relationships with money. So it's really important as Christians to really view it through God's lens, through the
yeah,
Bible, to make sure that we're not just drifting through life assuming everything's all good, or maybe we have these perceptions from the world that have informed us about how we should view it, um, or even through the church without
yeah,
like the actual biblical foundation.
yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone's background, I mean, everyone's story is so unique, and money is just, it is a big part of it. And so, how we were raised with money affects how we handle it and view it now.
mhm.
We'll start off with sharing our stories a bit. So, I'll go first, and then Grace can share hers. So, my relationship with money actually is generational. So I would say it would go back to my great grandparents. And for context, my great grandparents, my grandmother, my parents, we did not grow up rich or by any standards. So um, they were all born and raised in Vietnam, and they were very poor from what I know. And so there was always like a poverty mindset, and just we didn't have a lot. So my parents, I'll speak to their example and what I've seen growing up because I was always around it. I would say my parents' disagreements and fights have mainly been about money in some ways. There's
Mm,
certain nuances of money. Like I remember one of my parents' biggest fights was over a phone bill. I don't know. I was very young. I was probably under 10, but I don't know the details of it. But I just knew just as a kid, it was something about money. And even growing up, my dad was the breadwinner and he would kind of in, sort of challenge my mom to contribute a little bit. So that was also a source of tension. So growing up, I always had a poverty mentality. I'm not sure if our listeners know what that means, but it's essentially you feel like you're lacking and there's not enough to go around.
mm,
And you're always like wanting more to feel safer. And that's essentially what I
yeah.
grew up in.
And actually, a lot of, I will say, like for us, we're both from Asian families. I think this is
Hmm.
very prevalent in Asian culture, unknowingly. Like, that's why oftentimes, like Asian parents, especially Asian moms, I don't know if you can relate with this, but they'll hoard. They'll be like, oh my gosh, like I got this amazing deal at Costco or Aldi or, Ross.
Oh, my
And
mom is like that all the time.
yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with good deals. Like, I'm all for a great deal as well and to be smart in spending and saving. But it can also become this obsession where you're like now you're only you feel justified around purchases only if it's like super cheap and a good deal. And then you're like obsessed with finding deals, even buying things you don't need. So yeah, we see that a lot in Asian culture, especially.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, to this day, my mom still does that, and I kind of still do that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of carryover,
Yeah. And
into my current life.
it's not their fault either. It's like a lot of our parents, or especially if you're like a first generation, second generation immigrant, in that field, your parents also were kind of from that scarcity mindset even more so when they moved here, right? Like our parents, I have empathy because yeah, there's nothing else you can really rely on, especially if you don't know God, you don't know that there's a source outside of that. So you're just trying all that you can to save as much as you can to protect yourself. So it really comes
Hmm.
out of like self-preservation, self-protection, and our parents and a lot of our families just were never equipped to know how do you see money in a healthy way that doesn't have a grip or control over you.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. And how it relates to today, I mean, we have my upbringing of poverty mentality, not having enough, lacking, plus our where we live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where it's about money, career, success, buying houses, properties,
Mm,
etc. Just for me personally, it's just a lot for me to wrestle through because there is that lack, but then there's like a biblical view of viewing money, and then there's culture as
mm,
well. So there's kind of a
competing.
competing priorities almost. So
Yeah.
I wrestle with this like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis,
Yeah.
all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's I would say it to summarize my relationship with money. It was just a big disagreement point within
Mm,
my family.
yeah.
Yeah. What about yours? What's your relationship with money?
Thanks for asking. Uh, I think, well, first of all, I just wanted to validate and also just say thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of people have similar backgrounds and upbringings, but it's hard to, share. It feels like a touchy subject, and we don't want to acknowledge the pain, the fear around it. So anyway, just wanted to give Alex a lot of kudos for this whole podcast idea was his, or this topic was his, a fruit of his own struggle and testimony. So
Mm-hmm.
just want to put that out there. But the second thing, so for my story, I have, it's very interesting because I feel like at the core of it, it's also related to fear and these like negative associations, but in a very different way. So for me, growing up, my parents never talked about money in front of me. Like I literally remember going to my dad's office one time because I saw my name on an envelope from Wells Fargo, and I was like, oh, like what is that? And I had questions. I wanted to ask him, what is this about? Like, how do investments, banks, like all that work? And I just remember like this was only one time, but he did it multiple times. He said, oh, it's too complicated. You're not going to understand. Like you'll understand when you're older. And so I always just had this feeling that, oh, okay, I guess I'm not either not smart enough to understand, or maybe I'm just not ready. But that mentality definitely carried over even into my adulthood, where I was in college. I would be going to banks to try to figure out, like, should I do this thing with this account or this thing with this card? And I was just so confused. And I remember feeling very ill-equipped, how come no one taught me how to do this? How come school isn't teaching us about this? And most importantly, how come my parents didn't, equip me? And again, I don't think it's their fault. I think they're doing it out of love and out of, protecting or just wanting me to be in a safe, what they felt was like a safe route, so that they would just handle the money and handle the finances. But I do think, as Alex and I have talked about our future family and wanting to be parents, I think this is such an important thing to be talking to your kids about earlier on in a healthy way. And that's exactly why we have wrestled with it ourselves. That's why we encourage you to really lean into this topic yourself, because if you don't have a healthy relationship with money, then your kids are also not going to know how to do that either. So anyway, long story short, I was just very ignorant. But I'll say two things. The blessing that came out of it was I also didn't feel a stronghold over it for majority of my life. I mean, even today, it's not really a struggle that I tend to have when it comes to not having enough, because my parents just didn't complain about that, like growing up, at least not in front of me.
Complete opposite of my experience.
Right. Yeah. So I always felt like, oh, we have enough. Like whatever we want to prioritize as a family, we will have enough, and we can give generously to people. My mom really modeled that a lot by giving to everybody who needed things. And I also felt like that generosity ingrained in me as well. And I saw my parents spend and invest on experiences for our family. So we would do like trips, we would go out to eat together. And a lot of my, I think, warm, like loving experiences with my family were around those experiences that they invested in. So yeah, a lot of good things. I think the negative part of it really is the ignorance, am I equipped? Am I okay to be involved with this? So I think with me and Alex, navigating our first few years in marriage, I was like, I really trust you, but also like me growing in my own confidence of like, oh, I can have a say in these things. And Alex actually wants my opinion, and, growing in that confidence around money.
Yeah, we definitely have almost very similar, but very different experiences where your parents, they actually shielded you away from whatever they were going through, whether it was abundance or lack.
Yeah.
For me, it was so obvious.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, obviously we're struggling here. And I actually didn't have too many experiences. Like, I remember my mom would like bluntly put like, hey, we're too poor to afford like plane tickets to go on vacations. And honestly, I felt a little jealous or envious of other people who could afford to have family vacations.
And there's a lot more there too. Like I'm thinking of even how money relates with our emotions, like our psychological safety. Like I know that for my parents, my dad was the breadwinner. He worked and he had the income. My mom didn't. So there was also dynamics there, similar to what Alex was saying about his parents. So when I saw like tensions or fights, between my parents, even though they're not talking directly about money, I could see how money was a dynamic or a factor playing into that dynamic between them. So yeah, I feel like a lot of it gets revealed now when we're like, oh, why am I triggered? Why do I feel this way? It's not even supposed to be a big deal around this like situation around money, but it's because deep down as a kid, when you saw your parents or when you saw other people, have certain attitudes or certain freedoms or certain power and different dynamics related to money, it basically told you to tell yourself a story around it that you probably still believe if you're not conscious of it.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's so much we can unpack here.
That could be
I mean, I can already think of instances where if I don't have this, then this will happen, or I associate it with the fights that my parents would have around money. But I think, our parents didn't really know God as well as we do, and just like his promises and his provision. So I do want to shift gears a little
Mhm.
bit now that you've heard our story. So what I've learned just over the course of my life and Christian life is that money, you you listeners have probably heard this. Money is just a tool.
Mhm.
It's neutral,
Yeah.
just like almost everything else. But what matters is what happens in the hands of the person who holds it.
Right.
So money can be used for evil, whether it's sex trafficking or drugs, whatever, etc. And then there's the good side of it, the godly side, with generosity,
Mhm.
with advancing the kingdom, etc. So really, it is truly a tool, and it's not something that we own. Everything that we have is God's, and
Mhm.
it's taken a while for me to really understand it. I of course know it from um like a lesson,
Yeah.
but it's hard to internalize it
Right.
because our culture says, financial independence is good, or we have to um like break free from the 9 to 5, like all those narratives. it's
Mhm.
it's really difficult to wrestle with,
Or
but
or the opposite, which we'll talk about too, which is like you have to have nothing to be a good Christian. And you
that
know,
too.
poverty and prosperity gospel are both false gospels. So yeah. And I one quick thing I'll add is
Hmm.
I think even though a lot of Christians we know that yeah, I shouldn't see money as anything good or bad. It is just a tool. I think because so many of us have these underlying narratives and false beliefs around it that we haven't identified and unrooted. That's why we still struggle with that exact thing that you're talking about. Like, how can I have a healthy relationship with money? It's because you have wounds and unhealed things inside of you related to money that it needs to be addressed before you can expect yourself to find freedom in it.
Yeah, yeah, there I think we'll likely do a
Part
multiple
two.
part 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this can go on forever.
Yeah.
So I've been reading a book called Poverty, Riches, and Wealth by Chris
Valentin.
Vallotton,
Hmm.
and it's really opened my eyes. So I just want to read through some 4 questions if you're a person who is worried or worrying about finances. So the first question is, do you trust God to take care of you? I don't really need to explain that, but essentially, do you trust the God of the universe to provide for you, regardless if you have little or a lot, or everything in between? The second question, and this is more related to the tithe, and we'll talk about this more. Do you honor the leaders over you who give an account for your life? And I've wrestled with this question, like, are they using my money in the way that I want them to?
Hmm.
Are they using it to spread the gospel? I think there's a lot to unpack there, but essentially, there's a feeling of control that
Like you
creeps
know what's
in.
best.
Yeah, like I know what's best, and I want to direct the funds that I want to, but there's still, even though you're giving, it's still an act of control.
Hmm.
And I would say to that person wrestling with that, it's ultimately up to God to judge your spiritual leaders. And the Bible clearly says that.
Hmm.
And so wherever you give, it's about your heart, and trust God will deal with your spiritual leaders.
Yeah.
If you don't trust them to steward it well, then you should perhaps ask God to reveal why, or perhaps you're just under the wrong spiritual leadership and authority.
Right. I think that's a tension that a lot of people face is they want everybody wants to hold, organizations and leadership accountable for how they're using and stewarding the finances well, but there is a fine line where you cross over into like pride and control when you start having that attitude of like, oh, they're not using it well, I would have used it like this instead. And it's like, from somebody who used to be on the other side, especially in a church, and the leadership and the ministry side, it's like, wow, thank God, like our people trust us because there's so many little details and nuances that people on the outside have no idea about. And this is exactly why it's more, God is leading us to give here or invest here and there versus, how other people might from the outside might assume would be a quote unquote smarter use of funds. So, yeah, that's another topic, but I do think a lot of people don't talk about this. And I actually didn't even realize this until I started working at the church and had these kinds of questions and conversations
Mhm.
with the leaders there. Like, why when we talk about tithing or giving to churches, why the church? Why not other charities? Or
Why
why?
not people? Why not why?
Yeah.
We can go on why,
Yeah.
right?
And it's because society has normalized and made it such a big deal to be like, you control where your money goes, how it's used, and if it's not being used the way you believe, then, take it away. And I think it's just been overblown in that aspect.
The third question is, are you serving mammon, which is the spirit of greed and materialism, or God?
Hmm.
So Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money."
Hmm.
And the last question is, are you afraid of not having enough? I mean, I wrestle with this question all the time, given the background I just mentioned a few minutes ago.
Hmm. Yeah, a really good passage that I feel like we often hear about, and it's very prevalent in the church, but we're gonna dive a little bit deeper into it today because I think it really relates to this. Is Matthew 6:19-21. It says, "Don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." So I feel like this passage is really powerful because, many different things, but one thing is, I remember the first time I read this verse, I did not understand that last sentence. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. I was like, why shouldn't it be the flipped? Like, why would it say that instead of wherever your heart is, that's where your treasure will be? Because I think a lot of us in society, we're taught like the treasure is what you go after, right? The goal is to get the treasure. So in order to get the treasure, you got to make sure your heart is in the right place. But if you look at the passage, it's talking about wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart will be, implying that the heart is actually the goal. The goal is not to get the thing. The goal is to have your heart in the right place that God wants you to, how he wants your heart to be. So that's one thing. And then the other thing too is related to what Alex was just saying. Like, all these questions help us to reflect on, is my treasure really here on earth or is it actually up in heaven? Because our human temptation and tendency is just to believe in what we can see visibly. So of course, if everybody at work is talking about their financial stuff, their, what they can afford, their vacations. We see on social media, everyone flaunting, their nice things. And it just gets to us because our society like glorifies those earthly experiences and things as the goal. And again, those things are not bad. It's just that what is bad is when we convince ourselves that those things are what gives us life and security and happiness versus God himself. Do you want to also mention a related song that you've really been enjoying that's been ministering to you?
Oh, yes, yes. So there's this song by Owl City. If you don't know Owl City, they're most famous for their song Fireflies. That was released
A long time ago.
around 2010. It was like around when I was in high school. Um, but they released a new album. Actually, I don't know if
Adam.
Adam Young.
Shout out to Adam if he ever hears this.
The main artist, Adam Young, I don't know if he collaborates with other people, but I just know at least Adam's in it. So I'll just speak. Adam is a Christian, very obvious Christian if
Yeah.
you listen to the album. But there's a song on the album called Field Notes. That's field like
F-I-E.
Field, notes as in I'll send you love notes.
It's such a beautiful, you gotta listen to it. It's such a beautiful song about if you
So
find,
wholesome.
yeah, if you find eternal treasure that gives you so much joy, that's just nothing in the world can compare to it. You literally give up everything else that you have, and everything's in comparison, everything else is like a shack. It's like worthless because you know that this field, this kingdom is so much more priceless and valuable than that.
Yeah, what helps me also is just imagining the eternal riches we'll get when we see Jesus. And I mean, the ROI on that is just crazy. So if
Kingdom
you
ROI.
are really super long-term focused versus our maybe 100 years that we have on Earth, it's just so much better to
Mhm.
invest in the kingdom.
Yeah.
You'll spend forever and ever in eternity, but we're only 100 years, maybe longer if you're like super healthy and God blesses you with such a long life. I mean, look at our financial system too. And
Yeah.
I don't want to get into this, but there's inflation
Yeah.
and our banking system is a little messed up right now.
Mhm.
As of this recording, 2023
Recession. Yeah.
recession, etc. But
And everything can, just like it says, it can rot and be destroyed. Anything can disappear. So even if you say you make a lot of money, there's tons of countless stories of people who have lost everything and it's out of their control. They never expected it, whether it's a recession, a layoff, another tragedy, a scam. That's actually happened to us before. So there's just so many things that we cannot control. And actually, if that's ever happened to you, or if that's even going happening to you right now, where you feel like, why am I losing all this money, or how come this tragedy is happening to me, it actually could be a blessing that God is trying to teach you to let go of control of money, to make sure it's not your foundation, and to put your foundation on Him.
I'm also reading another book. So I'm reading two books simultaneously. This one's called Eternity Portfolio, and it is so good. Highly recommend it. We'll link it. But in the book, it tells us or advise or highly recommends us to have our own finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And it asks, how much is objectively enough? Like literally, do you have like a number in mind? Like these are things that we should be asking ourselves
Mm-hmm.
because it's unfortunate that the rich do get richer. That's because with more money, you can just do a lot more. You can buy more properties, you can invest in stuff, businesses, etc. And so if we play this rat race of money, it's never going to end. And when we get sucked into that, our treasures and our hearts will not be in heaven, but it's on the things of this world. It's
Right.
on the 100 years or so that we're here on earth.
Right.
There's no black or white answer to this either. It's totally dependent on each situation, everyone's situation. And it's up to you and God to decide.
Just want to clarify, what's unfortunate about that is not the fact that they're making more money. What's unfortunate is that no matter how much money you
Yes.
make, it can always have a grip on you if you don't address the root cause, again, in your mentality. Because you can listen, there's this awesome podcast, we find it very amusing, Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich podcast. It's very interesting because he basically meta narrates his conversations coaching couples about financial conversations. And you have these like millionaires, billionaires who are like scraping, they're like coupon cutting, they're like, oh, I had to get this deal, even though it's like pennies in comparison to what they make. But it's because they're stuck in the poverty mentality around I'll never have enough versus actually having a finish line, just like what Alex was saying.
So good. So I want to also dive a little deeper into some nuances of finances. And we're currently in a not very good economy here in the US. So I do want to address some things that our listeners are probably going through, like high interest rates, inflation, stock markets are going down. And we totally understand that. And I am the CFO person in our family. So I want to say that we all have desires in our hearts. Like for many people in the Bay Area, they want to buy a home, which is super expensive here, by the way. Average is more than millions of dollars or $1 million. But I think it's so hard to wrestle through because we want to honor God with our money, but then we also have these other desires. And then there's these economic pressures that we face. But it's hard to go through it.
Inevitably, there will be people listening to this who maybe you're a single mom, maybe you have a lot of debt, so not everybody's situation is the same. And I totally understand that. So what we're trying to get at is not like you need to do this or that. It's just helping you to reflect on, at the end of the day, regardless of your situation and your circumstance, how much are you placing your trust on money versus God? Because there also is evidence all over scripture that the more you release to God, the more he actually blesses you with. actually this morning, I didn't even make the connection, but this morning I was meditating on in Proverbs 3, how it talks about trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And actually, a couple passages down, I don't have it right in front of me, but it basically talks about like the more you surrender your wealth and give to God your first fruits, the more he'll actually multiply and give you abundance. And I think that's just the ironic part, right? Is you have to give, you have to let go in order for God to give you more, because he wants to be able to entrust you with more. If you're holding on to something out of poverty mentality, out of like, this thing will save me, God, I mean, he can do whatever he wants, what he knows is best, but it just makes sense that he is waiting for you to come to a place where it's not an idol and it's not a crutch, so that you can actually be a faithful steward and not feel like you're possessing or owning it for your own security, if that makes sense.
I do have a testimony about that.
Yeah.
But I will keep it short. For the first 5 years of following Jesus, I did not give anything to the church, to anything Christian related. Sad to say, but it was just such a stronghold in my life. Now I'm on my 10th year following Jesus. It's been a little better, but for the first 5 years, I was definitely very unfaithful, actually unknowingly unfaithful,
right.
because I didn't know about, what is tithing, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know about that concept until I learned about it later. But on the 5th year in about 2018, I gave my first tithe. It was extremely difficult, but at the same time, it was very fulfilling as well. And at that time, I was working in a pretty toxic work environment. I wasn't enjoying it. But after that, like months after that, God opened doors for me to have a job that more aligns with my personality, and just the culture was a lot better. Financially, God provided well above my expectations. And that's one example. I mean, another example was in 2020, where I felt like God wanted me to give a very significant sum to our local church. And I wrestled with that for a long time. And so after just weeks of praying, wrestling, arguing with God, I decided to do it. And then 6 months afterwards, I got a job that is so much better than the one where I was before. Even though that one before was pretty good, this one so much better in everything: culture, people, the income. And so this is just to illustrate that, yeah, God can do exactly that. He can bless you when you give more. But at the same time, I do want to caveat this: we're not endorsing the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
Please don't give to get something.
Right. Yeah.
But this is just like an example of what God can do.
Right. To reassure people, like from our experience. Well, I do have a question. I think some people might be asking, well, how do you know that's not a coincidence? How do you know like those good things that happened and just, how do you know it's like correlated?
Yeah, it's so easy to just call things like that a coincidence, but you can call it a coincidence. I mean, listeners can call it a coincidence, but I'll call it faith. I'll call it God.
Yeah.
Because I really do believe God does own everything in this world. So we will never know. Like
100%.
we will never know if it's what you call logical coincidence or is it God. It's like you could be driving to work if you're listening, and you don't get into a car accident. Is that a coincidence or is that God? It's really hard to say, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to put God in a box.
Like as humans, we don't know. The reality is we don't know, but we know that God is with us all the time. And so what we do know is he is directing our steps. He's rerouting things. He's protecting us in ways we don't know. And so, what in this situation, what is the most helpful for your faith and your heart is to like bring this to God and be like, okay, God, if this is what you did, then what are you teaching me? Or if this is what you're teaching me, then how can I grow? So anyway, that's another wormhole. But another thing I think I want to address real quick is that a lot of people have this concept of financial freedom, and we hear this a lot in terms of, FIRE. What's it called? financial
Financial independence.
independence, retire early. I think it's like a
Yeah, there you go.
really trendy thing these days. So I just want to address that really quick because I felt God revealed to me so much about this because I was wrestling with him. Like, God, I see these Christians who are, having passive income businesses, or they're having a lot of properties, or they're going to Airbnb. Like, there's so many like side hustles and side gigs. The more the internet advances and allows us to do this, which is great opportunity. But at the same time, there is the danger of still, can this control you and make you think that this is your God, right? Just to address that really quick, I felt like God was showing me that the whole myth of financial freedom isn't that it's financial freedom in itself in terms of the practical sense of freeing your time, freeing your resources, giving you more opportunities. Those things are not in itself bad. What is a danger is when we subconsciously take this term financial freedom and equate it with spiritual freedom, because then we are putting ourselves in the role of God. We're saying we can call the shots. We can do whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want. And that's actually what the world promotes, right? That's why in a lot of financial freedom communities, they're like, just you want to do whatever you want, go for it. Like, this is the path to do that. So as Christians, it's really important for us to remember, pursuing these financially, wise or opportunistic investments are not bad. But what is a danger is when you place yourself in the role of God rather than submit yourself as God's steward to steward those finances and those opportunities for his glory. So we can unpack that more in another episode, but I wanted to say that really quick. And the last caveat is false religion. I think a lot of people, we talk about prosperity gospel, like, Christians say, oh yeah, it's not about having things. But on the opposite side, it can also be dangerous to fall into false religion, false humility of like, look at me, I'm like so impoverished. I'm suffering for the gospel. This is everything I'm giving up. Look, I'm such a good Christian. And so that can also be a source of spiritual pride. And I really felt actually God was convicting me of that. Like, in the past few months when I was wrestling with this with God, like, God, is it okay to like pursue this podcast idea? Because I just feel like it's self-promotion. I don't know. Like, I always see other people doing it, but is it bad to be is it selfish? And ultimately I felt like God was saying, Grace, you're falling into false religion. Like, you think being hidden, being in anonymity is more holy, and you don't want people to think poorly of you. So you're just like shrinking away versus, breaking past the barrier of what will people say or think about you. So anyway, that's another thing to get into another time. But I just wanted to say that because I think on both sides, it is dangerous to fall into prosperity gospel or poverty gospel when really it's about the gospel of Jesus being the way and truth and life for us.
We know people who are very wealthy, loves Jesus, and people who are on the opposite side of the spectrum who also love Jesus. And there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of your heart yielding and surrendering to Jesus and following his call. For some, if you have the ability to make a lot of money, great, use it. But then there are others who are called to be like missionaries in Africa, which is awesome. God bless you for doing that as well.
Right. It's all about what God is uniquely telling you, not you thinking like, oh, it has to be a formula. It has to look a certain way. And if I don't do that, I'm a bad Christian. So one verse I'll read is in 1 Timothy 6:17-19. It says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. I love that it ends with the life that is truly life, because so often we think this is life. This is what we're living for. And this passage just really illuminates on top of so many other passages in the Bible, but we are living for eternity. That's what our true home, that's where our storehouse is, right? Is in heaven, is in God's kingdom, not here on this temporary earth that's going to fade away. And an analogy I heard from a pastor one time is if you store all your treasures here on earth, it's like having a hotel room and you're like decking out your hotel room. When you're going to check out that hotel room eventually, everybody's going to check out. So instead of putting your resources, your investment in decorating your hotel room. It should be in your true home where you truly will belong after. I can't emphasize this enough for people who are listening. It's not a rule book. It's not you need to live a certain way or do this because, I was telling Alex earlier, there's many scriptures and examples in the Bible of burnt offerings that people made to God, and God actually wasn't pleased because he was like, you're just doing this to try to show off your religiousness. You're trying to look like a good Christian. But I never asked you for this. I asked for your heart and your faith when you're giving me your burnt offerings. So again, I feel like it's very tempting for Christians to be like, oh, if you are telling me I should just give my money away, then I'll just do it and I'll be guilt-free. The point is to actually engage with God. What is he specifically asking you to do so that you can be freed from the stronghold of money? So to apply this for your week, we have 2 questions that you can ask and just be honest with yourself. Don't judge yourself. Don't shame yourself for your answers. The important thing is just to bring them to God honestly and wrestle with him through these. So the first question is, what choices are you making or not making that show that you are not fully trusting God to take care of you? And the second question is, what can you do in response to that in order to allow God to show you that he is your provider and that money is not? I think all of us struggle with this in some degree, and it's important to continually recalibrate, reset our hearts to make sure that God is the one that we trust in, not money. So we hope that these 2 questions really help you to evaluate and figure out, where are you in your journey? What are the areas that maybe you thought you had surrendered? Maybe it has a control over you again, or maybe you've never surrendered and God wants you to finally let it go and open your hand up to him so that he can give you even more. It might not look a certain way that you want, but it'll look the best way that he knows is the best.
Yes, and we know this is a lot to unpack, and this is only scratching the surface. We would love to hear from you, any other questions that you have on faith and finances, and we would love to unpack it more with you. Until next time, see you next week.
We hope this gave you a new paradigm or a renewed paradigm through which to view money according to God's lens, not the world's ways, because it is so easy for us to get swept up into what are other people saying or thinking, what are other people worried about, and then pretty much the enemy tries to distract and discourage us and make us all worried instead of living in the freedom that God intends for us. And then our faith becomes in our finances and not truly in God. And so we want to encourage you, use the Reflect and Apply guide to really walk this out. We don't just want this podcast to be something that's fun to listen to, but ultimately we want it to be a tool for you to equip you to really live by faith in your everyday life. And the other thing is, we talked about how our upbringing really shapes how we view money, but also it isn't just the case for money, it's the case for everything in life pretty much. So any area that you feel stuck in, every internal struggle you have, so much of it comes back to how were you raised? What were some generational patterns that you observed that you picked up and just normalized without even realizing? And so next week we have a very special guest. She is one of our great friends who's literally changed our lives. You'll find out more when you hear about it, but she's a great coach, mentor, entrepreneur, leader, and friend. And she's going to be talking about how do we overcome and heal from these generational wounds and recurring fears so that they don't have a grip on us, that we can live out in the abundance and the freedom God desires for us. So yeah, can't wait to share and see you back next week. If you liked our podcast, we want to ask you to help more people learn how to grow closer to God and experience the fullness he has for them by taking just 30 seconds right now to rate and review this podcast or like and subscribe on YouTube. It's a small action, but it makes a big difference so we can continue serving you with resources like this.
And we'd love to hear from you about your reflections and questions for us to unpack in the future. We invite you to share this episode and tag us and follow us for more encouragement and helpful tools for living fully the way God designed you to.
We pray that God fills you with his love, his joy, his peace, and his wisdom as you continue growing in your daily walk with him. We're so grateful for you, and we can't wait to see you again next week. See you soon.